Alrighty, so hope you're doing well. In this video, we are going to talk about the tier list for investing into the growth of your business, in my opinion. This is all based on my opinion. This is not financial advice or anything like that. I am not an expert in finances, but hold on. Let me see where you can put this right. Let's put it right here. Put it right over here. But I'm not an expert in financial advice or anything like that. I'm not a finance person myself, but I have experience in ecom, helping start and grow an ecom brand. So I've actually been in the trenches and done this stuff. So I want to give you my opinion here on various things that you hear people talking about and whether or not they are good or bad investments and how good. What are the things you should really be hammering down on, focusing on from a general point of view? So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started here. And we're going to do something a little bit controversial here. You guys may hate me for this. Number one, YouTube videos, as contrary to how this sounds, considering you're watching a YouTube video right now. Hold on. I don't know why why is it not letting me drag this? Hold on 1 second. All right, there it is. As controversial as this sounds, we are going to put YouTube videos in D tier. Now, here's why. YouTube videos can give you a lot of great information. I'm trying to give you some great information right now that can help you grow your business. There are several other, a handful of other creators, I would say, out there that also give you great, very valuable information. But generally speaking, this is not what's going to get you to the next level. This isn't, generally speaking, from just YouTube videos alone, without action, without implementation. This is not going to be what gets you to that next level. This might get you started, but unless you know who specifically to be watching, who's actually giving you very valuable information for free, there's very few people like that out there. But unless you know who specifically to watch, then this, to me, it's one of the biggest wastes of time in some ways if you're just watching videos to be watching videos to feel like you're doing something productive because you're trying to delay taking action. What's going to get you there is relentless action and doing the next thing, which I'm going to put in S tier. All right, this next one, which is a massive, massive step up from YouTube videos, in my opinion, far more valuable, is coaching, mentorship, and I could even throw in with this one some courses or programs. Now here's the nuance here. There's a lot of people out there who offer mentorship who don't really know what they're talking about, or they're just trying to take your money. They're just trying to mislead you into paying them a bunch of money to make a bunch of money off of you. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people who've actually been there, actually done that. If you're a business and you're doing 30, 40, 50K a month and you feel stuck, one of the most valuable investments, in my opinion, that you could make, one of the only investments on here, in my opinion, where you could 100x your return, in some cases, 10x, 100x your return, is mentorship. So there's no other way, out of all these things that I've listed here, there's no other way you could invest maybe $500, $600 a month in something. And by the way, I don't offer mentorship. I don't offer coaching. I'm not trying to sell you some coaching service. I'm just speaking from experience on where I've gotten the most value from. There's nothing else where you can get onto a call with somebody. Let's say you're spending $10,000 a month in your ad account, a fairly lower budget, typical for what you might see in a small business. They make a few changes. They give you a few suggestions for ad creatives. You implement those suggestions and you go from $10,000 a month to spending $20,000 a month and doubling or nearly doubling your sales. There's no other investment on any of these things that I've listed where you're going to do that and see that level of an ROI. That's why I put this in S tier. So the next one, and there's only one other one that might rival this, in my opinion, when we're talking about the ROI specifically. that you'll get from it. But I'll get into that here in a second once I get through some more of these. So the next thing I would say, we're going to go back down to D tier. Ads through third-party platforms. Let's make this a little bit bigger if I can. All right, that's got to be fine. All right, so ads through third-party platforms. This one goes in D tier. When I first started marketing, getting into marketing 5 years ago, or however long ago it was, at this point, it's kind of it feels like it's been a long time, but when I first started getting into marketing, I was looking for the shortcuts. I was looking for these different platforms to try. I was going on Fiverr, hiring people to drive traffic to the website. I was going on, Taboola or whatever other places it was, looking for all these shortcuts when I first started selling products online, getting into marketing. And what I found is none of that stuff really worked. There was a reason that this stuff was cheap. There was a reason that this stuff costed so much less than, say, for example, running Facebook ads with a conversion campaign. There's a reason the traffic campaigns, even if you want to go that far on Facebook, cost less than the conversion campaigns. You see what I'm saying? And so you're going to get what you pay for. This is one of the biggest lessons you'll learn in e-commerce is with everything you do, you're going to get what you pay for, generally speaking. And if you don't get what you pay for, then typically what's going to happen is that the price may change at some point. Let's say, for example, you're paying for something and you're getting 100x back from what you're paying for some thing that you're doing, whatever it may be. That price for whatever you're paying for that may change in the future. It may go up at some point. There was a time when Facebook ads, for example, I say Facebook, it's technically Meta now, I guess. I say Facebook. There was a time when Facebook ads were even more profitable, I would say, than they are now. There was a time when you were seeing even lower ad costs. But over time, that cost has kind of crept up. Now, that will lead me to my next point here. My next thing here on this list. Let's make this a little bigger. Facebook ads. Now, are Facebook ads still the GOAT when it comes to marketing? Yes. In my opinion, yes. I don't think there is any better way that I know of right now when we're talking about a paid ad platform that is more scalable. You're not going to get the highest return. I want to make this clear for people who may not understand how this works. When you're selling a lower ticket e-com product, you may not get the highest return on Facebook ads. You may get $3 back for every dollar you put in or whatever it may be. But there's nothing else, in my opinion, that is as scalable and as predictable still if you know how to use it. If you know how to market and if you are skilled at marketing, there's nothing else where you can see as much scale and as much growth as Facebook. This is one of the best top of funnel traffic platforms, in my opinion, for brands. And so that's why I put this in S tier. Yes, it's more expensive maybe than it once was, but it's still highly, highly effective. And most brands who are running ads, a lot of their budget, if not all of their budget, even in some cases, is going to Facebook. So next thing here, we'll say email marketing. Generally speaking, investing into email marketing, just generally, right? And what you're investing into may depend, but I'm going to put this in A tier. The reason I don't have this in S tier, email is actually, if you compare the exchange rate of spending $1 on email marketing to $1 on Facebook, you are going to get more back for the money that you spend to send that email through email marketing than you will through Facebook, generally speaking. However, it's not as scalable. And what I mean by it's not as scalable is your email depends on your cold traffic or your top of funnel traffic, I should say. It's going to depend on the top of funnel traffic that comes in. In other words, if you stop spending on ads, let's say you're highly dependent on Facebook ads for your top of funnel sales, and you stop spending on ads, your email is probably going to get worse. Most likely your email is going to get worse because those people had to get into your funnel. They had to go visit your website, and it had to be somebody who had some sort of intent to purchase for them to sign up for that email list, generally speaking. So that's why I've got it in A tier. Now, email for many brands, this could be 30% plus of their revenue, 40% plus, sometimes 50% or more. So this can make a massive difference. And it's one of the most cost-effective ways that often a lot of brands overlook on how to improve their efficiency of their overall marketing. This is one of the most common things that people don't really put much emphasis on, and this is a big mistake that you see, is they don't put enough emphasis on email. So that's why I've got this in A tier. Email is very effective, but it relies on that top of funnel traffic, right? And the other thing with email is, yes, it may make up 30%, 40% plus of your revenue, but how much of that is truly new customers who would not otherwise have bought? Now, this is a very complex question to answer because every customer journey is very complex. They may have many, many touch points in a customer journey. So what that means is your email may have some assistance in somebody's decision or some weight in somebody's decision to purchase a product, right? But it may not be the reason that they bought. So what you may see a lot of times in email is a good chunk of that revenue that's being attributed to email may have been people who would already have purchased, but it can still have some effect. So if it's 30, 35% of the revenue, let's say, for example, in theory, maybe half that was net new people who were not otherwise going to buy. Just hypothetically, I'm just giving rough ballpark numbers. I know it may be different, but that's still a good chunk of your revenue. If you had 35% of your revenue and close to 20% was net new people, that's still a very big chunk of your revenue and can make a massive difference if you're talking about a brand that's barely making any money versus a brand that is running at a solid margin. Email could be a big difference maker in that. So email is absolutely important. Next thing is going to be micro influencer shout out. So this is, those sites that you see where you can basically work with influencers and stuff like that. I'm going to put this one in either C or D tier. I would say we'll go C tier. C tier because it can be hit or miss. This isn't something I really do very often. And just a side note here, getting good content from micro influencers, et cetera, to run as ads can absolutely be A tier or S tier. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these sites where you can go onto these sites and pay somebody $50 to do a story post about your brand or whatever. Maybe that's effective in some cases, and it can be, but generally speaking, it's hit or miss. Really, I would say you have to have good systems in place and, enough of a budget to really do something like this at scale. And there's better ways, in my opinion, to go about, bringing new customers in versus the small micro influencers posting on like Instagram or whatever it may be. You can do like product seeding campaigns. Now, don't get me wrong. Here's another way you could make this better, B or A tier even, is running like a product seeding campaign through some platform where you send out bulk, like a ton of free products to people to do reviews on and stuff. That could, in some cases, be better. But if you're talking about just paying people for like a story post and stuff like that, I would say it's C tier. So the next thing I would say is your apps. Generally speaking, like your Shopify apps, what I'm referring to here is your Shopify apps that are basically designed to help, quote, make you more money. Now, some of these apps I think their benefit can be kind of overplayed. Now, this comes back to, once again, just because we have to understand the nuance here. Just because somebody clicks something doesn't mean that is the reason that thing happened. Just because somebody clicks your email doesn't necessarily mean that the email is the reason that they decided to buy. Just because somebody clicks your ad doesn't necessarily mean that ad is the reason that they bought. Just because somebody clicks an upsell, or whatever on a car app doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be all net new revenue. Now, these apps can make a big difference. Let's say, for example, you got an upsell app and you test some different upsells. You're using something like After Sell by Rocket. Maybe you see your AOV go up by, $4 or $5. That could be big. That could make a big difference, but you're not going to see massive increases of, $30, $40, $50 most likely. You're not going to see, your AOV change by 50% or something crazy like that just from a few quick tests in most cases, I would say. Now, subscription apps could absolutely, if you have a recurring product, you're selling a supplement or something, these could absolutely be A tier or S tier if you're selling a recurring product that actually has a need for a subscription. But generally speaking, for your average everyday brand, I'd put them in B tier. I think people spend too much time worrying about all these little knick-knack apps and every little app they can possibly find, and these things often don't make as much of a difference as you might think. But they can make some difference. So it really just depends. Now, as for a different app that I would put in S tier, that I think is one of the most under-leveraged things you can possibly use, a post-purchase survey. This, in my opinion, is S tier. You can use a post-purchase survey for so many things. You can ask your customers what products they want to see. You can get information on offers from a post-purchase survey. You can get all sorts of information that can be used to grow your business. This is one of the most effective, I think, one of the best apps that will absolutely help you, in my opinion, is having a post-purchase survey with strategically asked questions. So that absolutely gets S tier because, say, for example, you use this and you come up with a winning offer. By using this post-purchase survey to gather information, this could 100x itself in some cases. Not making any financial claims. I don't know your business. I'm just saying, generally speaking, this could be extremely valuable if used properly. Now, next one I will say, we are going to put Google Ads here. Make this a little bigger. We're going to put Google Ads in C tier. The reason this is C tier is because I think a lot of brands overspend on platforms like Google with the branded search and everything. They spend too much money on platforms like Google because they may appear better. They may appear to give you a better CPA, but they're often less incremental. So it's not really, in many cases, driving as much growth for the business, but they may appear better. So brands a lot of times may spend more on platforms like Google than they really need to. Now, Google Ads can be very effective, but really what you have to be really successful with Google Ads, and I'm not a Google Ads expert, by the way, but generally speaking, I would say what you need is a product where there's already a lot of intent for it to really see success. If we're talking about like branded, like search, like search ads on Google, you have to already have a lot of intent or at least some good keywords where you can scale. If you're selling a product that's like new to market, where there's not a lot of intent, it may be a little bit more challenging. There's still ways you may be able to do it, but it's more challenging, I would say. Now, the next one, there was a time when I would put TikTok in either A or S tier. And in fact, this was one of the first places whenever I was getting into marketing, several years ago or so, this was one of the first places we really saw success. So there was a time I would have put this in S tier. However, at this point in time, where I would put TikTok ads is probably B tier or C tier. I would say if we're talking about your standard TikTok ads or TikTok Spark ads, right now, I'd probably say B tier, maybe C. In fact, I'll just put it in C. So when I first started running TikTok ads, I took a course, I went through this program, and I just learned some very basic stuff about TikTok ads. And almost immediately, one of the first few ads that we started launching, after going through this course, we were seeing like a 3x ROAS or higher. When we were able to scale up to around $500+ a day, which at the time I felt like was a lot of money. When we were seeing really good results, consistent results, we're able to scale, and we probably could have scaled a lot further. The thing with TikTok, there's a few things. One, they tend to be more finicky when it comes to banning you for things. And so this particular product, it's a little bit of a gray area product we were selling. And so we kept running into these issues with bans. And so we started to see some results. We're starting to see some success, and then boom, start getting hit with rejections. And then eventually our account got banned. And then now it got unbanned, but then we've just kind of moved on to using Facebook. So TikTok can be very effective, but in my opinion, it's not as effective from what I've seen, at least, as it once was. The types of ad creatives that are going to work on TikTok may be different than what works on Facebook. It's a different platform. And so the way your creatives look that work is maybe different. And outside of that, the ads just don't tend to last as long from what I've seen. So on TikTok, maybe your ads last a couple weeks or so. On Facebook, we've had ads that have lasted months, in some cases, even like a year or more. You're not going to see that. If you're using broad targeting on Facebook, you can have your ads last a very long time, believe it or not, especially if they're really good ads. On TikTok, you're not going to see ads last for months or a year or more, in some cases, from what I've seen. Ads just typically die out very quickly. You have to keep pumping out new ads. It's a lot different of a platform. And in my opinion, it's just not as good now. The next thing I will say, I'm going to put this in A tier. We're going to say UGC content. Now, the reason this is not S tier for things to invest in is you have to know how to do it properly. You can't just go hire a creator and say, hey, make me an ad. Generally speaking, you have to know what makes winning messaging, what makes a good hook, what types of things do you say in the hook, how do you call out your target audience, what types of creators are you looking for, how do you introduce the product, what types of editing stuff, all this stuff goes into what makes a good ad, and so with UGC, a lot of people who don't see success with it, I think, they just may not know how to actually script a good UGC ad or know how to actually source the right creators and stuff. So it takes a level of skill to make it work, but it can absolutely be effective. Now, last on this list, I would say, I'm going to put this in S tier, is hiring A-level talent, top level talent. Why is this A tier or S tier? It's S tier because it's going to cost you more oftentimes to work with people who are the best, who are really, really good, but there's a reason that it costs more. So it comes back to this principle of you're going to get, generally speaking, what you pay for. When we're talking about e-commerce, if you go hire somebody for $1 an hour, just hypothetically, to run your Facebook ads, probably not going to see the best results. Now, if you hire somebody for $50 an hour, maybe they're pretty decent at what they're doing, right? Maybe they understand how everything works. If you hire somebody for $500 an hour, they probably know what the heck they're doing, right? They're not going to be the cheapest, but they can probably do a pretty dang good job at that, generally speaking. If they have a good reputation, they've been doing it for a long time, they're highly skilled. But this comes back to, you still have to make sure you hire the right people. Just because something is more expensive doesn't necessarily mean it's better. So anyways, in the last one I would add, we're going to add one more actually. The last one I would add to this is investing in your product. This is another thing. Now I'm going to put this in A tier, if not S tier. We're gonna go A tier. Investing in your product, if you are doing this smartly, lowering your cost of goods. For example, you invest in a new mold for your product that maybe lowers your cost of goods. You invest in your product design, coming out with new products, etc. Whatever it is, new releases, new drops. This can be one of the biggest things for your brand to see success at a high level, in my opinion. Investing in your product can lower your cost of goods, which is often another place where a lot of small businesses struggle with higher cost of goods because maybe they don't know their numbers. They're not as, financially savvy when it comes to looking at their spreadsheets and stuff. Maybe they don't have good financial statements, that are accurate to go off of, and they don't know their cost of goods. So one of the areas that small businesses may fall short, there's a couple different areas. One, they may not understand marketing, right? And so a lot of smaller businesses, they don't understand how marketing really works. So that may be one of the areas. Two, they may have higher operating expenses relative to their sales. So they may not understand how to actually lower their OPEX or increase their sales volume to lower those operating expenses. And then the third one is they may have higher cost of goods, or they may not know how to properly price their products. So investing into your product, optimizing your cost of goods relative to your sales is another place that can make a massive difference as well, because this stuff all comes back to numbers a lot of times. In business, if you are not a numbers person, you really need somebody who you can seek advice from, in my opinion, who is a numbers person if you want to succeed at scale and be really successful. And a lot of this comes back to knowing how to read your numbers, knowing how to make decisions based on the numbers that make financial sense, and getting good advice there. So anyways, with that being said, if you guys found this helpful, feel free to let me know what you want to see next. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else you'd like to see a tier list review on. But anyways, hopefully this helped, and that'll be it for this one. Peace.